Well, hello, everybody. Welcome. Let me see who's here. I've got quite a group already. Um, oh, gosh, let me get this mouse working. I keep forgetting that for some reason, this program does not like my up arrow or my down arrow, and I have to use my mouse. So hello, welcome. Tonight, we've got a pretty big challenge tonight. We're going to try to do 6 amendments. I'm going to try to work our way through the rest of the Bill of Rights, Amendments 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Stray Kitten, Pat Butler, gosh, look at all these fantastic people. Sue Me, Diana too, and Little Lone Prepper. Welcome. Good, so good to see all of you. Thank you for being here. So let me start off a little bit different tonight because we're going to be talking about this a little bit later. So here we go. This ought to make you. Let me go ahead and I'll share this with you. How's that? Since we're going to be talking about this, we'll go ahead and share this up there. So. Okay, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in court. You have the right to talk to an attorney for advice before we ask you any questions. You have the right to have a lawyer with you during questioning. If you cannot afford a lawyer, one will be appointed for you before any questioning if you wish. If you decide to answer questions now without a lawyer present, you have the right to stop answering at any time. This is called the infamous Miranda warning, and we'll be talking about that a little bit more as we get into the evening. Hello, Butch Graves, welcome. And but anyhow, we're going to talk about, we talked about Mapp versus Ohio last week. So we have 2 key cases, then we have 2 subordinate cases that we'll talk about this week. So we've got a total, My Prepper Journey, welcome. We've got a total of 4 cases that we'll kind of use to reinforce the Bill of Rights this week. Of course, the 2 famous ones, and this was when I was in high school debate. So this all came about at that time, in the 60s, and so this was the big discussion that we had. Was in 1964 we had Danny Escobedo versus Illinois, and then in 1966 we had Miranda versus Arizona. So Mapp versus Ohio in 62. 64 was Escobedo versus Illinois. 66 we had Miranda versus Arizona. So those become the 3 what we might call pinnacle cases of individual liberty and individual rights that came out of the 1960s as a result of Supreme Court decisions concerning in particular the 5th and 6th Amendments. But remember that Mapp versus Ohio included the 4th Amendment. So. And that was illegal searches and seizures. So let's go ahead and see if we can. Hello, Just Arizona. Welcome. Glad to see you. Sandy Aaron, Phaeoxerus. Wow. We're getting the people in here, so it looks like we're going to have a good crowd this evening. So let's start off with the 5th Amendment. No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment by a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia. And we'll talk about that here in just a minute. When in actual service in time of war or public danger. Nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb. Nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall government or private property be taken for public use without just compensation. I'm only going to touch on one portion of the 5th Amendment right now because I think we have to go to the 6th Amendment and we'll revisit that, and then we'll use Escobedo versus Illinois, which is a real critical decision in the 6th Amendment. And then later that gets overturned by the Supreme Court in Miranda versus Arizona because they say, no, the 6th Amendment is not really the key thing here. What's really key is the 5th Amendment. So the Supreme Court kind of puts the 2 kind of together, and they say you really can't have one without the other. So we're going to discuss both of them before we discuss the 5th a little bit more in detail. The part that I do want to talk about is this part that says that except, you get all these things, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia. And so what happens is, if you remember that oath that we take, and it says, I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I shall obey the orders of the President of the United States in accordance with the Uniform Code of Military Justice, so help me God. So the soldier, the sailor, the Marine, the airman, the space guy give up basically the Fifth Amendment to a subordinate item that's delineated here, and that's non-judicial punishment or the Uniform Code of Military Justice judicial system. So there are some rights there. So you have Article 31 in the Military Code of Conduct, or military non-judicial. I'm sorry, Uniform Code of Military Justice, UCMJ. Uniform Code of Military Justice has Article 31, which is basically going to come back later. We're going to find out it's the same thing as the Miranda decision. It's under the Fifth Amendment. So the military was way ahead of the Supreme Court as far as ensuring that people had their rights read to them, and that people were aware of their rights. And so we have both judicial court-martials. So you have a special court-martial, a summary court-martial, and general court-martial. And each one has limitations. So, for example, a city jury cannot give you the death penalty. Well, that's the same thing in the military. You have different levels of courts. So you have a special court-martial means I'm giving up my rights to non-judicial punishment under Article 15 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and I want to go to a special court-martial. Well, when you go to a special court-martial, you're having a higher authority make the decision than, let's say, a company-grade officer. Company-grade officer, has various limitations. They can only restrict you to the barracks for 2 months, take away half your pay for 2 months if you're E4 or below. If you're an E4, they can break you all the way down to E1. And then once you become a non-commissioned officer, sergeant or above, E5 and above, they can only bust you 1 rank. If you are a warrant officer or a commissioned officer, they can't bust you at all. All they can do is take away half your pay for 2 months and confine you to your quarters for 2 months. So that's the limitations of that. But if you go to a special court-martial, now it goes up to the battalion level. It goes up to a field grade officer. He has the authority to do some of those things, okay, that the company grade officer does not. Then if it's a more heinous crime, then you can go in for a general court-martial. So that's going to be headed up by at least a colonel, but usually it's going to be a flag officer. And so they can do anything. They can even have you executed. Although the last soldier that was executed was Eddie Slovak in World War II, right towards the end of World War II. Yes, sue me. Even if you have a family, especially if you have a family, that really does hurt. Now, one of the things about the military is you have you have several different forms of pay. You have your base pay, which is what they can take half of. And then you have quarters allowance on top of that. So if you're married, you get, in my case, as a warrant officer, I was entitled to $450 a month for quarters allowance. So that's tax-free, but that only, that supposedly goes towards my rent. And then you get $125 when I retired for what they call quarters allowance. Separate rations, which means that you're authorized to go out and purchase your own food. You don't have to eat in the mess hall. So, that money does not get included in that half of, you only get half your base pay is taken away. So the military does have a separate judicial system from the civilian world. However, the rights are a little bit more strict for the individual. So you do have the ability to defend yourself a little bit better in the military than I would say you do in the civilian world. Unfortunately, Sandy Aaron, this is going to sound really, really terrible, but they suffer. The family usually suffers if the soldier, sailor, airman, Marine does something bad and causes that. But I will tell you that the vast majority of the time, what's going to happen is, and when I've seen, and I've seen plenty of Article 15s administered non-judicial punishment, But what they'll do is they will usually put that, what's it called? Suspended sentence. So I'm going to reduce you one pay grade. I'm going to confine you to barracks for 2 months. I'm going to take half your pay for 2 months. However, I will suspend that sentence for 90 days. And so if you don't do anything else bad in 90 days, it all goes away, and they never put that on you. However, if you do something bad within 90 days, then the full sentence gets taken into effect. So usually that's what happens. I'm going to say in the vast majority of cases that I saw, they suspend pay. They suspend the punishment for 90 days and give you 90 days to make sure you act well and behave and everything else. And the bad thing is now you've got an Article 15 on your record. So if it comes back that you have the same thing again, then basically they can say, okay, we're going to up this to another court-martial instead of an Article 15. So they can take that as, if they give you a break and then you violate it again, the hammer is going to come down on you. Let's go to the Sixth Amendment real quick, okay? And I did this during the Trump impeachment because there were so many violations of the Sixth Amendment. It was pitiful. So in all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law, and to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with the witnesses against him, and to have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. So there's several elements within the Sixth Amendment that are guaranteed to an individual. Okay, so it says you have the right to a speedy and public trial. So they can't have a secret trial. We can't have the Gulag, Государственный управляемый лагерь, or the state-run camp is what Gulag stands for. We can't have those. We can't have the KGB doing their in the secret trials and convictions and all that kinds of stuff. So it has to be speedy and public. Now, the individual who is on trial can ask for a delay because later on it says that he shall have compulsory process to obtain witnesses in his behalf. So that means if I am been accused of something, then I can have my attorney request a delay in the trial while I gather more evidence as to my innocence. Okay. Now, that brings up a topic. Nowhere in the Constitution does it implicitly say that a person is innocent until proven guilty. That's a theory that has been espoused within the United States that is commonly cited, but is not directly written in the Constitution. It's implied, but not directly stated. Okay. So a speedy and public trial in the state where it was committed. So if I do something here in Texas, Oklahoma can't say, "Hey, we're going to try you for something you did in Texas." Okay, it has to be in the state in which hello, devil dog. It has to be in the state where the crime was committed. Then you have to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation. So we are investigating you for this. Now, if they find evidence for something else during a legal search, they can use that against you. If it was an illegal search, then they can't use that against you. And that's going to come up here with the Supreme Court decisions we're going to talk about. To be confronted with the witnesses against them. So even what happens is the testimony, especially if they do a deposition, prior to the trial, has to be made available to the defense, the same as anything that the prosecutor has. So if the prosecutor withholds evidence, for example, somebody says, well, that couldn't have been him because he was at this place, and the prosecutor has that information and holds it and doesn't release that to the defense, and the defense finds out about it, they can have a mistrial because that information should have been made available to the defendant. And then a compulsory, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. So let's talk about Danny Escobedo versus Illinois. Let me get up here, get rid of these notifications up here, and I want to do another share screen. And we're going to come up here to, well, I don't have Escobedo up here. Oh no. I thought I had him up here. Okay, I don't have Danny Escobedo up here. So anyhow, Danny Escobedo versus Illinois. In 1962 or 63, Danny Escobedo's brother-in-law was found dead, shot to death. And so Danny Escobedo was considered a primary suspect. And so they apprehended Danny Escobedo and one of his affiliates. I think he was a relative, but I'm not sure how close a relative. And so the two of them were held and they were detained for like 20 hours and interrogated for that entire time. Danny kept saying he wanted to talk to a lawyer. There was a lawyer outside there to represent Danny who was denied access to Danny during the discussions. And likewise, the co-defendant was not allowed access to an attorney. During the time, they played that, cops and robbers type game. And so they went in to Danny's associate and said, hey, Danny upped and confessed and said that you're the shooter. And so, he gave himself up. You're going to go to the chair for this. And he says, oh, no, I didn't do it. Danny was the shooter. And then all of a sudden just opened up and gave everything. So now we've got him saying that Danny Escobedo is the shooter. So they go into Danny Escobedo, and Danny Escobedo says, you can't use that, everything. So it goes to trial. He's convicted of murder because what happened was it turns out that he murdered his brother-in-law for abusing his sister. It was a domestic abuse case. And so Danny took care of his sister by killing her husband. And so, all this stuff got out. Danny appealed it and said, hey, wait a minute, my rights were violated. I was not allowed access to an attorney. They interrogated me. They never told me what I was being investigated for, all these different kinds of things. So that became the first, the 1964 Supreme Court decision that says, hey, you know what? His rights under the Sixth Amendment were violated. He wasn't allowed an attorney. He was interrogated. He was never told what the charges were. All these different things happened. So that became the law of the land, right? That you had to make sure that you had an indictment. You had to make sure that you told them what you were arresting them for. You had to give them access to their attorney, all this kinds of stuff. So, and that was all based off of the Sixth Amendment rights. Meanwhile, in Arizona, we have a case developing, and that's called the Miranda case. And so Miranda versus Arizona, kind of the same situation. He's accused of rape of a young girl, murder, and armed robbery. And all this stuff happens very similar to the Escobedo case. But this time when he gets up to the Supreme Court says, no, his rights were violated. And so they come up with what's called the Miranda rights. And that's what I read to you earlier. Whoops, let me get here. So that's what I read to you at the beginning. So let's go take a look at that, because there's also two Supreme Court addendums to that are quite interesting afterwards. And so, so what the Miranda rights say is right here. We're going to be reading this portion right here. You have the right to remain silent. You don't have to say anything, okay? Anything you say can be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to talk to a lawyer for advice before we ask you any questions, during and everything else. You have the right to have a lawyer with you while we're questioning you. If you cannot afford a lawyer, we will appoint one for you before any questioning if you wish. And if you decide to answer questions now without a lawyer present, you have the right to stop answering at any time. So that's basically the Miranda rights. And so as a result of that, we now, when you get apprehended or arrested by a law enforcement agent, they're supposed to, quote, Mirandize. We've now made that into a verb. read you these rights, that you don't have to talk to them. That you can't be coerced, you can't have the right to have an attorney present, and all this other kinds of stuff. So that's a result of, this is a further delineation of the Escobedo versus Illinois case. So now Miranda versus Arizona becomes the Supreme Court law of the land. It adds to Escobedo and puts it under the purview of the Fifth Amendment, so that now we have both the Fifth Amendment and the Sixth Amendment kind of conjoined, and saying that all these things have to take place during an arrest. You have to be afforded these rights. You have to have all kinds of these things. So let me see. So yes, you're right. However, most of the time that you see a deferral of a case, it's at the request of the defendant. Now, where we see an exception to that, and I haven't seen the results of it, is the Trump case in Georgia. So the prosecutor is asking for the speedy trial to take place, so that the trial is taking place during the elections. And the last I heard Friday, I have had one of the busiest days I've had this year today. I got my sister out of the hospital, took her home. I had visited with two neighbors who were in need of help with St. Vincent de Paul. We had our biweekly meeting this evening. Then one of my friends and I were discussing another case, and it's just been one of those extremely busy days. But gosh, it went fast. But anyhow, let me see. So speedy. So Friday, there was discussion between the judge in the case and President Trump's lawyer. And the lawyer was saying that this was impeding with the supremacy clause of the Constitution and going to have an effect on the presidential election, because they were timing the trial to occur during the election, so it would have negative effects on the president. And so then the judge asked Trump's attorney, well, what happens if we defer this and until the election? And so the attorney for President Trump says, well, if he wins, then according to the supremacy clause, you can't try him until after he's out of office, which will be 4 years later. If he doesn't win, then you can immediately go to trial right after the election, which will be, the second Tuesday in November, or first Tuesday in November. And so I don't know. I haven't been able to see the news today. I don't know if there were a decision made on that yet or not, but that's going to be an interesting one to see how the state judge in this case for, I believe it's fraud, election fraud. They're trying to get him for trying to influence the electoral outcome in Georgia is basically what it is. State election laws. It'd be interesting to see how this turns out. I don't know yet. I don't want to make any predictions, but it is interesting how they're going about it. Yes, when martial law is in effect, you still have your constitutional rights. However, there are some of them that can be restricted. You can have a restriction on your freedom of movement. So, for example, they could have a lights out policy, that is, that no movement after dark, and that is enforceable. They could have a restriction on weapons possession, depending upon the situation. That would be interesting, because I know they did that during Katrina. Nobody challenged it, but I have a feeling that the Supreme Court would probably come back and say, there's really no justification for imposing that. There are certain things that can happen under martial law, but for the most part, if you stay inside and away from the area of interest, let's call it, I don't think there's that much to worry about. Now, so here's something that most people fail to take into consideration. under martial law. That's the military imposition of federal law in the United States. So right now, we have 7 active Army divisions and we have 2 active Marine divisions. I think the total number of divisions, Marine, Army, National Guard, and Reserve is about 19 in the United States right now. During World War II, the Germans had 35 divisions in France and still did not have 100% martial law or control over France, with 35 divisions in a country whose size is the size of the size of Texas. Okay, so France and Texas are roughly the same size. So if you think that they're going to effectively have martial law over the entire country, I don't think it's going to happen. Vast majority of city and local sheriff's departments have said that they probably, depending upon the circumstances, might not participate in martial law. So what we can see happening is in certain disaster areas. Let's say something happened in New York City. I can see it happening there. I can see it happening in Los Angeles or San Francisco, or even in Houston, or once again in New Orleans, like we saw happen after Katrina. I don't see it happening on a nationwide scale. And even then, it's going to be, it'll have varying effects in different areas, basically. Okay, I don't think it's going to be effective as far as a martial law throughout the U.S. Let me see here. So just Arizona. Okay, so hopefully we've got that answered. Hi, Shenanigans. Welcome. Good to see you, Sandy Aaron. Yes, as a matter of fact, the United States, I saw a report here just recently, and Guns God, what's that channel name? Anyhow, there's a minister out of Missouri, Guns God in the Bible. I can't remember the name of his channel, but I subscribe to him, and he put out one today that the Democrats have rewritten or have a proposal to rewrite the Second Amendment or to repeal the Second Amendment, and they're trying to get that up, and they want to get it pushed through the House and the Senate prior to the next election so that they can get it out to the states for ratification. I don't know if it's going to pass the House. It could pass the Senate, but Joe Manchin has resigned. Basically, depends on who his replacement is, who gets appointed as a replacement. There's all kinds of things going on. I don't think we're going to get an amendment to the Second Amendment, whether that be an annulment or a ratification of a new amendment, amending the Second Amendment. I just don't think it's going to happen. But they're trying to get it done. So we shall see. Okay, so that's the second and or the Fifth and Sixth Amendments. I do want to go into a couple of the follow-ons to, oops, nope, that's not what I want. I want to do present, share screen. Oh, here we go. Okay, so is this showing, I hope? Let me see. Yeah, that's showing. Okay, so I'm going to go to the main page down here and we're going to take a look at it. So this talks about Miranda itself. And then in 1984, this paragraph right here, Berkemer versus McCarty, the Supreme Court decided that a person subjected to custodial interrogation. So even if they don't say, you are under arrest, if you're just under custodial interrogation, which means that your freedom of movement has been limited. So you don't feel that you can get up and walk out of the interrogation room. At that point, they have to Mirandize you. And so it says right here, the procedural safeguards enunciated in Miranda's, regardless of the nature or the severity of the offense of which they are suspected or for which they were arrested. Notably, the Miranda rights need not be read in any particular order, and they need not precisely match the language of the Miranda decision, as long as they are adequately covered and fully conveyed. And that's another Supreme Court decision, California versus Prysock. So Basically, as long as you're told that you have the right to an attorney, you can keep your mouth shut. You can stop the questioning at any time. You can have an attorney present with you. If you can't afford one, one will be appointed for you. As long as those general concepts have been conveyed at the time of apprehension and the restriction of your movement, then the police is good to go. Okay. And they also have to ask you if you understand those. Then in 2010, Burgui versus Tompkins, the Supreme Court held that unless the suspect expressly states that they are invoking the right to remain silent, implied there, subsequent voluntary statements made to an officer can be used against them in court, and police can continue to interact with the alleged criminal. So unless you say, I'm invoking my right to remain silent, if you say something, whether it be confirmatory or negatory, that can be admissible, okay, even after you've been Mirandized. Then in 2022, Vega versus Teco, the Supreme Court held that police may not be sued for failing to administer your rights. So that it's not an encroachment by the police officer of your rights for not Mirandizing you to the point to where they have any kind of personal responsibility that can be seen in a court of law as that person having personally affected your personal rights. So that's kind of the Fifth and Sixth Amendments put together. God, family, and guns. Thank you, Sumi. See, I have such wonderful people. They read my mind. God, family, and guns. But he was talking earlier this evening, and a new short. I'm not short, but a new video talking about a proposal to amend the Second Amendment. So thank you, guys. I hate to tell you this. Sumi is Canadian, and Sumi knows so much about our country. I'm just totally in awe of her knowledge and some of her outstanding questions about our government and our civics and our Constitution. And she stays on top of things. Just really impressive. Just totally impressed. Okay, Amendment number 7. We're going away from the criminal and we're going more towards the civil or non-criminal. Okay, so it says in suits at common law, where the value in controversy shall exceed $20, the right of trial by jury shall be preserved, and no fact tried by a jury shall be otherwise re-examined in any court of the United States than according to the rules of the common law. Okay. So, for example, I've just been involved in a breach of contract. I sold my store. The person who bought the store didn't meet all the requirements of the contract. I sued. We went to court, and the judge agreed with me that it was a breach of contract. Now, we did what was called a bench trial. She could have requested a jury trial. Okay. With a bench trial, there is an opportunity to appeal that within 30 days of the judge's decision. But according to the Constitution, if we had gone to a jury trial and the jury had said, we agree with the plaintiff, me, then there was no appeal. Okay. Once the jury says you broke the contract, you owe him the penalties, you owe him the amount of money that he incurred, the loss he incurred, then there is no appeal to that. So you can only appeal once if you do a bench trial. So it goes from bench trial to appeal, and then that's the deciding factor. So, but the funny thing is, you have to pay whatever the judge imposed before you can appeal. So, kind of weird. Amendment 8. Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. So this is the one that they're using in California, where they're saying that you can't arrest a person for shoplifting unless they shoplift at least $1,000 worth of stuff. This is the one where they're saying even if you arrest them, you can't hold them in jail. You have to charge them, fingerprint them, and let them go. So this is kind of we get into subjectivity a little bit as far as what is excessive fine, what is cruel and unusual punishment. If you go back to the 50s and 60s, we had what were called chain gangs. And so chain gangs were, if you had been convicted for a long time, you could be forced to go out into the roads and work on road improvement. You could be forced to do farm labor. You could be forced to do all kinds of things. And but there was a Supreme Court decision that said, that could be cruel and unusual punishment. So now you can volunteer to be on one of those groups and get paid a couple dollars an hour, and or a day or whatever. It's well below minimum wage, but then that money is available for you to spend in the commissary. Okay, so they don't consider that cruel and unusual punishment as long as you're being paid for it. Where that comes in is when we get to terms of execution. What is cruel and unusual punishment as far as execution? Well, they said, well, the gas chamber, it takes too long. There's suffocation and all this other kinds of stuff that happens. They said that hanging, you can, if it's not done correctly. There were some of the Nazi war criminals in World War II. I forget the sergeant's name, but he had no training as an executioner, and he was the hangman, and but he would do it wrong. And so it didn't snap their neck and break their neck and cause almost instantaneous death. What it did was it caused them to suffocate to death. And in some cases that lasted up to 12 minutes. So that's cruel and unusual punishment, clearly. But they said, hanging can be cruel and unusual punishment. Utah still offers the firing squad. In the case of Gary Gilmore, remember? And so he was offered either gas chamber or, I believe it was gas chamber, either gas chamber or firing squad, and he chose the firing squad. So, there are all these different things. Now, there was a period in time, and this was back in, I'm going to get my history messed up here. There was a period of time where the death penalty was considered cruel and unusual punishment. And so the Supreme Court suspended death penalties, executions, for a period of a couple of years. We had a guy here. He was from Rosebud, Texas. His name was, Kenneth Allen McDuff. Kenneth Allen McDuff. And he was convicted of murder, sentenced to death. Supreme Court did away with the death penalty. He got time served with good behavior, released from jail, back on the streets. A year later, he's been convicted of several more. He was a serial killer, convicted of several more murders. He was finally put to death when they lifted the stay on death penalties. But Kenneth Allen McDuff was one of those where he had a death penalty. The death penalty was lifted by the Supreme Court. He got out of jail, went out, did it again, ended up getting executed for it. As a matter of fact, one of the things that the Kennedys were famous for, remember that JFK, John F. Kennedy, appointed his brother Bobby Kennedy as the Attorney General of the United States. And Bobby Kennedy said that Alcatraz was cruel and unusual punishment. And actually what it was really expensive to maintain. Getting electricity to it and fresh, clean water, drinking water, potable water, and all this other kinds of stuff. So Bobby Kennedy basically closed down Alcatraz because under the auspices of it being cruel and unusual punishment. Sumi, you're absolutely correct. So, at what point is a child responsible for their actions? So a life sentence for a child is considered cruel and unusual punishment. However, we'll see quite often somebody 16, 17 years old, because the age of majority is 18, they're going to say, we're going to try them as an adult because of how heinous their crime was. They had to know what they were doing. So there have been exceptions for that, but typically that's going to be 1 or 2 years for the exception for children getting life sentences or even the death penalty. So, there's an awful lot of subjectivity in the Eighth Amendment as to what is excessive bail. Especially since you have bail bondsmen who will put up the bail for you if you can come up with 10%. So basically, if I give you $1 million bail, all you have to do is come up with $100,000 and you can get out. Okay, give that to your bail bondsman and you're out. So in reality, I only have to come up with 10%. So that's caused bail to get higher and higher, which is what California is fighting against. Is that all they've done is with the bail bondsman being able to come up with the total amount, and you only have to come up with 10 as the amounts go higher. in order to keep a person in jail. They're coming up with these multi-million-dollar bails. And so they say that's cruel and unusual punishment. So they want to go to a bail-less system where you're basically released on your own recognizance until you're convicted. Okay. 9th and 10th Amendments, extremely critical opinions. Just Arizona, I really don't know. I do know that she's about the same ilk as Cuomo, the person she replaced. I don't keep up with her, to be honest with you. I listened to Jason, what is Angry American, Angry Pepper. Jason talks a lot about her. He doesn't care for her at all. And so I would say that he probably knows more about her than I do, since he lives there in Manhattan. So I'm sorry. I don't know enough about her to where I can say one thing or the other. I can't. What I can say is she has not impressed me. How's that? So I'm just not seeing anything that impresses me. Is that fair? Okay, 9th and 10th Amendments. So let's take a look at this. Remember, the only things that Congress is allowed to do are enumerated in Article 1, Section 8. Okay, so if it's not in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, then basically Congress cannot do it. Okay, we have the Constitution is a government limiting document, not a government enabling document. If it's not mentioned in Article 1, Section 8, then the 9th and 10th Amendments kick in. So the 9th Amendment, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited to it by the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Okay? I'm sorry, that's the 10th Amendment. The 9th Amendment is the enumeration of the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. So the 9th Amendment says if Congress can't do it, then the people have the right to do it. Okay? The 10th Amendment says if it's not given specifically to Congress the right to do this, then it automatically falls to the states. So let's take a look at the Dobbs decision, which overturned Roe v. Wade. Nowhere under Article 1, Section 8 does it say anything about abortion, nor does it say anything about health care or any of the other arguments that were used in deciding Roe v. Wade. Okay, so basically, what the Dobbs decision said was that it was incorrectly decided because, remember, we got to go back now to the Fifth Amendment, and Sixth Amendment, and it says, in all prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right, okay, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law, okay? So the district that affected Roe v. Wade was where she lived, the state where she lived. It was not a federal issue. So what the Dobbs decision says is that because of the limiting power of Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution and the 10th Amendment, that there can be no federal law guaranteeing abortion, nor can there be a federal law prohibiting abortion. Okay? So the federal government can't get involved because under the Constitution, you've got Article 1, Section 8, and you got the 10th Amendment. So the 10th Amendment kicks in and says, you know what? This is a state's issue. It belongs to the states to decide whether and what they're going to do for abortion. Now, if you look at it, what that does is, remember, the states are more easily swayed. Congress is supposed to be a very slow-moving institution. That's why in the Senate they have a 2/3 rule, except when they want to pass Obamacare, and Harry Reid decides that he's going to dispense with the rules, and instead of a 2/3 vote, a 51, a simple majority vote is sufficient, Or when you have somebody like Nancy Pelosi who says we're going to deem this passed, the bill passed, instead of actually voting on it. She just deemed it passed. So we see that at times we've seen people, heads of the Senate, head of the House, kind of usurp their authority and pass bills that should not have been passed. But we have a very limiting government under Article 1, Section 8, and then everything goes to the state after that. Now, if the federal government is supposed to be slow moving, that enables the states to be a little bit faster moving. So you've got a little bit smaller area. States, at least here in Texas, we have elections every 2 years, governors 4 years, but local representatives and everything else, basically every 2 years. The Congress, our legislature meets every other year. So what they're supposed to do is that gives the people a more direct vote as to what's going to happen and how to decide it within the state, okay? Because you're electing the people who will make the laws a lot more readily than you will at the federal level. Is what even legal, Sandy? Are we talking about what Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi pulled? No, it's not legal. And I'm surprised that they let it go, but you know, what are you going to do? So we did make it all the way through 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10th Amendments. Oh my goodness gracious. Sumi, you're absolutely correct. That is a travesty. And, but you know, that's some of the shenanigans that go on in Congress. One of the things that we also have is writers to bills. So quite often, what will happen is so the whip within each party is the person who goes around and says, "Do we have enough votes?" And so they're talking to people saying, "I need you to vote for this, or I need you to vote against that." Democrats have it together. They really have it together. Very seldom will you see a Democrat vote against a Democrat bill. Republicans don't have it together. They are more liberal, not liberal, more libertarian in the sense that they don't feel the same party cohesion that Democrats do. And so they'll vote their conscience or they'll vote their constituents a lot more readily than the Democrats will. We don't see that same thing happening where the whip goes around and says, "Hey, you want to do something." Now, I think part of the reason why the Democrats whip has such a great experience getting people's votes is they will have a rider. And so they say, what will it take to get your vote? And they'll say, well, we've got a new highway that's coming in that we need to build between X and Y. And we really need some federal support, some money to build that highway. Okay, we'll put a rider on this bill, giving you $52 million to build that highway. Can we get your vote now? And they say, yeah, now you got my vote. So this is on the Defense Appropriations Act, right? So all of a sudden on the Defense Appropriations Act, we got $52 million for a highway in Timbuktu, okay? So because of those riders and adding riders to bills, they get people to vote for that bill. One of the most famous, one of my favorites, was Nancy Pelosi added a rider to a bill for a Defense Appropriations Act. And it was for several $1 million to extend BART. And so BART is the rail system, the Bay Area Rapid Transit System in San Francisco. And it goes down into San Jose. Actually, it goes all the way down into, the epicenter for the 71 earthquake I was in, Gurneyville and Watsonville. And but anyhow, it goes all the way down into there, almost to Salinas and Monterey. But anyhow, so they wanted to extend BART. Well, they got this federal funding to get her vote for the Defense Appropriations Act, and the federal funding built a BART railroad line, metro line that went right past had a stop right in front of a building that Nancy's husband owned. And of course, this quadrupled the value of that building, and it went straight down and terminated at one of Nancy's largest contributors. And he had a very large company there. And so now all of a sudden his employees had access to BART, more readily, and it quadrupled the value of his property. So, that kind of was suspicious about how that all happened. But that's the way Congress is. That's why we need to do away with professional politicians and get more citizen representation in politics. And I'm all for that. To get rid of the professional politicians. Yeah, I agree, Sumi. The Democrats are more team players, and the Republicans are more individualistic. Okay, so Sandy Aaron. Oh, okay, we answered that one. Okay, so we've got 10 minutes left. Yeah, that's the exact reason. So one of the things, and I'm kind of against it. I'm kind of for it, but I'm kind of against it. I really don't have a solid position on it. But there's this talk about giving the president what's called line item veto. So, you say, hey, will you vote for this? Yeah, give me $52 million so I can put a duck pond in Central Texas, and I'll vote for it. So they put in $52 million for a duck pond in Central Texas, and I vote for it. Then it goes to the president, and the president says, you know what? With line item veto, I don't want this. So I'm vetoing this one thing. You've got to overturn it through the repeal process, that's in the Constitution. But I'll approve everything else. And so that's called line item veto. And they want to give the president line item veto. There are times I wish he had it. There are times I'm glad he doesn't. I would like to see clean bills. I would just like to see a bill that everything is exactly what it says it's supposed to. Hello, SD Mountain Man. Welcome. I would like to see clean bills where, if it's the Defense Appropriations Act, let's just talk about defense. If you want money for a rail project or a highway or a new lake or anything like that in your area, let's vote on that separately. I'm tired of all these fluff that gets added to different things and just increases the overall cost of the bill. So, but that's my personal opinion. You can agree or disagree, because I'm not really firmly embedded either direction. I can see the advantages of both. And that's true. And so, see, what we see is that quite often, for example, the what's it called? Student loan forgiveness. Okay. That's an example where we're trying to use the executive privilege to come out with an executive order to forgive the loans, but they can't, because that's something that has to be done by Congress. And so, there's stipulations and everything else. And so, yeah, there's an attempt by both sides of abusing abuse and counter abuse. How's that? Amen. Isumi, you've got that totally right. I can't tell you how many times I've seen different people show up on the floor of the House or the Senate with a bill and say, "This was given to me at 10 o'clock last night, and you want me to vote on it today?" And just unbelievable stuff. Wouldn't that, I would like to see everything in bills in that we can, in things we can understand. When we were talking in court about the contract, and so her attorney looked at me and said, if we take a look at paragraph 3 of your contract, it says this. And if we look at paragraph 10 of your contract, it says this. So why does paragraph 10 contradict paragraph 3? I said, only if you interpret it the way you do. He says, well, how do you interpret it? I said, well, I interpret this as a lease and this as a purchase, and the two shall not meet, because I can't sell something that doesn't belong to me. And if it's under lease, it belongs to the lessor and not to me. I said, the reason it's such complicated language is because that's why you guys write it, so that we have to hire people like you to understand it. So I'm kind of at your mercy. You're the people who write it. We hire you to write it. We hire you to interpret it. And I kind of got a little bit of a snicker from the judge on that one. He has put an abeyance on them. I'm not sure that they've been totally forgiven. I think he's forgiven some Pell Grants, but he hasn't forgiven overall what he did. And that is true too. I want to say it's more egregious under him, but the violations have been there now for, since Johnson, that I'm totally, actually since Roosevelt, we can take a look at where in the Constitution does it give us the authority to mandate that you pay a tax for a retirement plan that we call Social Security. Nowhere in the Constitution is there authority for that. Social Security is totally against the Constitution. Okay, but it was sold to us for our own good. Okay, and quite often that's what they do. They'll tell us it's for your own good. We need to do this for you. So that's how they get by with it, and they'll say that this falls under the General Welfare Clause of Article 1. Section 8. So it says under Section 8, to provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. So they'll take that general welfare clause and they'll quite often say this falls under general welfare. Therefore, the Constitution gives us the authority to do it. Wouldn't that be wonderful? I think you're absolutely right. That would be fantastic. But now I will tell you that sometimes some of this language, because they'll say constituent to or whatever the legal language is, and they'll give a reference to another document. Now you have to go reference that other document to find out what this one is talking about. And so what they'll do is they'll just put a reference in there, so you have to go research this document to find out what they're including in this document, and it can get extremely difficult to read it and understand it. So I'm not even sure you'd be able to get 20 pages a day. I think that's optimistic. I think that quite often it's trying to keep themselves legitimate and in business. Because if the common man can understand it, there would be no need for lawyers. So I think they create their own demand by their own terminology and everything else. And I even said that in the trial. I said, I look at this as a common sense person, as an intelligence analyst. I know I'm not looking at it through legal eyes, and that those are totally different eyes than my intelligence analysis and my common sense analysis. And so. Yeah, and that's so it's general welfare. It's for your own good. It's for your safety. It's for your and what was it Benjamin Franklin told us? People who are willing to give up their rights for safety deserve neither. And Sue Me is basically quoting Benjamin Franklin. Look at that. So that's kind of where we are. Okay, 58 minutes and 43 seconds. Wow, we got 6 amendments in one night. Read this, pick it up, get it. Because, Hamilton, Madison, Jay, and possibly the fourth being Benjamin Franklin, talking about what they intended for the Constitution to mean. So, this is what we meant for it to this is how we meant for it to be interpreted. Very important document for you to read. And I strongly recommend that you read it. And then there are other good things out there. We got this one, which is Understanding the U.S. Constitution. You've got the Cliff Notes Guide, which is great to have. And then, of course, you can go down to your local congressman or request it from your senator. You can get the Pocket Constitution. It also has the Declaration of Independence, and it has this one has the Gettysburg Address, if I'm not mistaken. Let me see. I think it does. Yeah, Declaration of Independence. And nope, it doesn't have the Gettysburg Address. I thought it did. Okay. Well, there we go. So my normal closing. Numbers chapter 6, verses 24 through 26. This pink tab right here. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord let his face shine upon you and be, oh, you know what? Before we do this, I gotta stop. Next Monday is Christmas Day. The Monday after that is New Year's Day. So I'm not going to see you for 3 weeks. Okay. So next time we get together is going to be January 8th. Okay. So one thing, please keep your head on a swivel. Things are not looking good. And there's a possibility that we're going to attack Yemen in the near future. We've moved 3 Arleigh Burke destroyers into the region. The Houthis fired on another ship. Things are not looking good in that area. So there's an opportunity that we're going to have some bad things happen between now and the next time we get together. So do me a favor, keep your head on a swivel. Pay attention to what's going on around you. Enjoy life as much as you can. If the news starts getting too depressing for you, turn off the news. This is, keep your sanity, keep your head about you. Be positive, be uplifted, be prepared. And I'm looking forward to seeing all of you again on January 8th. If you don't come tomorrow night, we're finishing up Clausen's nuclear war survival skills. And then we're going to start in on discussing what happens during a grid down situation, an EMP or CME or terroristic destruction of our grid. So now that we got all that out of the way, now we can go to the closing. Okay, so the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord let his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord look upon you kindly and give you peace. Amen, Sue Me. What a great piece of advice. Always, when I gave the speech at my daughter's wedding, what I told people was always look for it. Hold hands. Always hold hands. Never pass up an opportunity to tell somebody that you love them. Those 2 things, just togetherness. And that's what we say here is, remember, we're all in this together so we can come out the other side together, because togetherness is the key. Well, the way you get together is you tell people that you love them. You tell them that they are important to you. You show them that they are important to you. You go out of your way to do things for them, and you appreciate them. And so I love you all. I appreciate you. Thank you for your time. It's an honor that you share your precious time watching me bloviate on topics. And so thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And so in the spirit, I wish you happy holidays. Right now, we're still, I believe today's the last day of Hanukkah. However, I do wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And I will see you next year, and we'll continue on with the amendments to the Constitution. We're going to go through the Civil War amendments. So we'll probably do about 8 amendments next week or in 3 weeks. Okay. So Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. Please stay safe. Love you all. Bye-bye.